Thank you, everybody. I want to make the most of this time, so I won't have a long preamble. Ram and I have conspired already that he and I got to speak yesterday, so we'd like to really get some input from Sajal, Sanjoy, and then I'll bring Ram in at the end for some other questions. But we'll see how the conversation goes. I'll remind everyone, I'm a very authoritarian moderator. I snatch the mic back if we talk too long. And I don't want to do that very tiresome thing where I ask a question and everyone feels like they need to respond to it. What I'd like to do is direct some specific questions, and then if anyone here has any point they want to add to that, I think that's the best way to handle the limited time we have. Because Sajal and Joy didn't get the opportunity for questions, I hope I might sort of steal that first, and then I want to go to Sanjoy. So I just have a very simple question for you. You know me, I'm always trying to think about future things, right? Jumping in future things. So Joy, I really want to come to you first, and hopefully you can pick up where you left off at the end of the talk here. So in Entangled Lives, you do a number of things, right? You talk about histories of entanglement, but you also talk about alternative spatial and cosmological imagining. I'd just like to push you to project that forward a little bit, right? And if someone is trying to research a similar thing, look at knowledge production in an interspecies way, 20 years down the line, where do you think they're going to be with thinking of these entanglements? So I'm just going to throw that one to you now.
I have to be a bit of a seer for that. But yeah, I mean, like I said, plants and I mean the non-human world is accessed upon by people for different purposes. You know, it's not just a kind of material relationship that you have, but I think. I mean, at one level with environmental degradation, and especially the Northeast and Mizoram, especially in our loss of the habitat, I think it's going to be much more sort of pertinent, you know, and I think that at one level there's going to be a lot of symbolic value that is attached to our flora and fauna, but at the same time, I don't know, I think, you know, as we all know in Mizo society, the church plays a very important role in the way we have perspective, I mean, you know, how it predicates our way of thinking. So depending on how the church sort of, you know, brings in the environment into the rationale into their theology, I think that will have an impact on the way Mizo as a whole also try and understand the natural world around us. For instance, you know, in the book we spoke about how you know the hornbill, you know, which is hardly seen in Mizoram today, is, and even in other parts of the Northeast as well, is becoming such an important identifying marker, you know, the hornbill. And we don't see it anymore today. So it is a commodification of a bird for identity purposes, that we have a hornbill festival which also capitalizes this. So I think it's going to depend a lot on all these factors like the church, the environmental degradation that we are seeing today, you know, I don't know whether artificial intelligence and all of that will also impact the way we have a relationship with the non-human world as well. Okay, so broad sort of things that maybe more to think about.
Thank you. Sorry, it was a bit of an unfair question, but I do think that we want to hesitate that these relationships are not just tradition. They're not just relegated to tradition, but they're an important part of contemporary and future worlds too, which I think is really important. Sajal, I wanted to ask you many questions because your work spans so many different things, from missionaries to rebels to what you were talking about today. But maybe because you did make a comment in your talk about this being a very conflict-affected region, and we seem to go through periods, and I'm going to bring you in on some way in a second, We seem to go through periods where we think, oh, this is a period of relative stability, and then something else will happen. So I just wanted your thoughts on do we allow ourselves to think this is endemic, or do we allow ourselves to think that there is a possibility that things will sustain peace at some point in time, or what factors you think are relevant in that scenario?
Thank you. About 6 months back, there was a seminar organized by Asiatic Society, Calcutta, and the theme was the same, that what happened to all these disturbances in organization? What happened? Yeah, yeah. So people came out with different social categories, different experiences. I said yes, suddenly all the secessionist movements have disappeared, all the organizations have come to negotiating table. Things seem as if, as if when the new government comes and everything kind of, disappears, and suddenly others feel, oh, other government did not do the same thing, that is why. If they had done the same thing, it would have gone wrong like that. Then, in my presentation, I felt, and I said that all these are dissenting voices, or whatever in the form. Sometimes it takes the form of conflict, sometimes challenge, sometimes crisis. These dissenting voices, marginal voices, the space for dissenting voices has suddenly disappeared. Just yesterday, there was a post in Facebook, and one Assamese lady, she was saying that I want to say something to my country, meaning Assamese, her Assamese fellows. She said, we have fought against CAA, that is CAA, for a long time, and the date was announced 2-3 days back. We burst out there in front of my house in Guwahati. There was the burning of vehicles and all that, and suddenly it just disappeared. And suddenly after that day, nothing is happening. She is asking, does it mean that we are happy with CAA now? We have accepted it? And that is why there is no dissent. There is no opposition to that. But there was a time when last time CAA was announced, there was almost 6 months long education. And then the Prime Minister visited. In fact, he was showing the black flag there. But it was in a month when election was held, which comes to power. And she says that, it's very meaningful, I don't know whether it is still there in the Facebook, that she says, it's not that we have accepted it, or because something which jeopardizes our future, how can we accept it as that? But the state machinery has imposed such a fierce atmosphere among us, because we are all family people. We can't afford to go to jail or have to fight, and that is why people are afraid. They are not coming out, but inside we are burning. We are burning, we feel, how can our own government to ourselves? So that's what I say, that dissenting voice, suddenly that space got shrunk. And the myth that there was peace, and which is going to be long enduring, is burst by the Manipur episode. That it was government, and whenever things doesn't go according to the plans, these conflicts will burst out. Manipur is one case. Assam for the timing has been suppressed, but we do not know. I have a feeling that more, as soon as the dissenting voice the space is shrunk, and that is why they are not doing, but people will force out of it. Because dissenting voice is one such voice which cannot be stopped for long. That is what history tells us. And I think no, it is not ending. Unless you have enduring solutions to this problem, this is going to come back like the way Manipur has come back.
I was in Nepal last January. Similar to you, city I used to know very well, worked on, booked on. I had this strange, this is very oddly peaceful, right? it's almost like your conference, you know, as soon as you have that thought, you think, oh no, I've done that thing where now surely something will unravel. Sanjoy, I want to come to you on this similar topic. We talked on the way here about some of the shifts in language and the way the central government has I guess, channeled some of these changes into the region to try and subdue some of this opposition and agitation towards the region there. So I wonder whether you could talk about where the region finds itself in that relationship in the contemporary moment and how that affects things like activism, agitation, opposition.
Thanks. I think what's increasingly happening is a series of, and just pick up on what Sajal was saying, a series of things. Just because dissent is either silenced or silent doesn't mean it's gone. Just because an issue is not discussed doesn't mean the issue has not gone away. I think a few days ago there was a remembrance of the March 5 strapping of Vizor. Many of us obviously were not around at that time. But these histories remain embedded in our psyche, in our parents' memories. And to come, so whatever the government or governments may say, some of these issues remain very deep within us. And it takes some time for them to come out. But coming to your issue of the way language is used, narratives, new narratives are used to actually reframe certain situations. So 2 years ago, the government announced that AFSPA was being removed from large parts of the northeast. You know the AFSPA. I don't need to explain the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which was used very extensively in Mizoram, Nagaland, Manipur, and Assam, a little bit in Tripura. Well, the fact of the matter is the AFSPA has been removed in the sense that it's been taken away in a way from public discourse. It's sitting on the sideline where our friend is sitting, controlling the sound. If he wishes, he can switch off my mic. So it's over there. It's not here. It's not sitting on the stage. So AFSA is removed without being repealed. It's a very clever way of addressing an issue. And I spent about 1 or 2 in the morning writing an article on the CAA. And there is a nuancing there which is being developed, which is trying to separate the two, the NRC, the National Register of Citizens in Assam, from the CA, because it's extremely complicated. And the line that is being given, which is difficult to counter, is that, look, all of you were fearful. There's nothing to fear. This is how it is. It's just for these poor illegal migrants who came fearing death to life and liberty. And that's all there is. So, but there is a very interesting pushback. And the pushback is coming in terms of new writing, novels which are being written, and I'm not just talking about Mizoram, but across the region, people are finding voice and resonance in the kind of new literature that is coming out in fiction, not just non-fiction, in fiction. If I take a new book which has come out just a few days ago called Red River, it is about the time of insurgency in Assam, of crackdown by the government, but also it brings in Bhutan and Bangladesh into the story. It's actually quite a remarkable tour de force. So narratives are being perhaps imposed, but narratives are also being revisited and resisted. So I think that's important, even though the media may not even see it.
Yeah, even though the form might be different to what we've seen previously, it seems. So that's I think, interesting time because you made this point about March 5th, right? So Joy, if I can come to you about, in being Visa, one of the things I really took from it was about memory and memory practices, community memory and cultural memory practices. And one of the things that I'm always interested in is how public memory works in different societies and on things. And so I wondered whether you could speak a little bit, I know I'm taking you back to some of your earlier work, about in Mizoram, in this society, how sort of public memory of past figures, past events, past struggles sort of operates. How you would explain that to an outsider like me?
I remember Sajal and I were at a conference several decades ago here in Mysore, and that was one of the earlier conferences that we had on, memorializing the Ramachandra. I can't remember which year that was, and I was quite surprised that there were 2 or 3 kinds of strands that were sort of articulated at that conference, if I remember correctly. One was, there were pastors in that, of course, there were academics, and then there were civil servants, retired civil servants. And so there were 2 or 3 kinds of voices that operated at that, if I recollect it correctly. One was the pastor's point of view, and this was, he's no more now, very prominent view, which was forgive and forget. What has happened, and let us forget all these things. It's no point remembering these things, and it just evokes fresh emotions, new emotions. So let's just forget about it. So that's one thing that was the strand. Then there was of course a very, very vocal strand about the need to memorialize them. And I found that kind of need was emerging essentially from people from outside the state at that point of time. From outside the state, people were the ones who were saying we have to memorialize it and we have to remember it and things like that. And the third strand, which I found on, when I was doing my research on the Ramachandra as well, was that when people actually suffer, they find it very difficult to articulate. So when I asked people, what was your experience? Like, my own family lost an uncle, he was beaten up by the army, and then I have relatives in villages which were grouped together and they had to move out. And the only thing that they said was, it was just too difficult. But going beyond the articulation of it, when you say difficult, what does that mean? And things like that, very often people are unable to articulate it. So I often find this paradox, I think, at one level, which is that the people who suffer are very often the people who are unable to articulate it. And it is usually people who are from the outside, who want to put that into language and try and express that as well. So I find that happening. Now, of course, then there is, so I think on my response to you is that it is extremely complicated. And now, of course, there is a politics of remembering as well, and whom do you remember also? Because I think that's something that I noted in my work, being visible in other articles that I've written, which is that it is a politics between, at least at that point of time, between the Congress and the MNF. So that politics also plays into how the period has to be remembered as well. So without getting into great details about that, I think, so there are, any period of insurgency or difficulty or insurrection, I think there are different strands that one has to sort of bring to, keep in mind, I think, because there's not just one narrative we can talk about.
Thank you. That's a very thoughtful answer. And I think it's very interesting for those of you who know Joy's work, and I'm sure you all do. How you then go to camera as witness, which is much more about personal memories and how they're shared and archived over time privately, which is a very fascinating contrast. Do you want to add that to this one? Yeah.
Yeah, very, very glad you made this point about remembering and the difficulty of speaking, an experience which is almost unspeakable. Because I made this, colleague and I made this film called Rambo. These were on struggle years and it's been screened at a legal copy college, so you can see it at some point. One of the things that struck me, I was talking to Buddha Kam, the former chief secretary, and asked him, unlike other states, whether it's Manipur, Nagaland or Assam, there is no resurgence of an effort at confronting the state. He says people went through such hell, sorry to use the expression, such trauma, that they will never go through that again. They never want to go through that again. When you had your homes burned, you'll be forced to march to a new center, you'll be grouped to village, find new tomb or try to survive. You know, these are things that people will never forget. And I'm sure you know that two-thirds of the population of Mizoram was moved from their villages to new villages in that period of 67 to 69, regrouping. So this is a collective trauma, not just an individual trauma. And the thing that I remember the last point here before I hand over is, once we showed the film, after the film there was a lot of silence for a few minutes, and then people asked questions. And one of the young persons got up and said that, you know, these are new stories to us because our parents have never told us these stories. And the story from the parents was that we wanted to protect our children from understanding or going through what we do.
Yeah, just add to what Joy and Sanjay asked. You know, in that conference that Joy mentioned, 2009 was probably. The best part was some of the army men who were involved and the bureaucrats like Jafar, who was involved in the entire movie, came and saw secular representatives and talked against it. And that moving account by one of the army officers who had, who said that I was ordered, I don't remember the village, ordered to burn the village and move the people from one village. And he said, I was reluctant to do it, but I was duty bound, I did it. I went and asked people to come out, burn the village, and then said that you move on now. And then suddenly he saw one little girl rush into her burning house, and everybody was scared that she'll get burned. Then she came out with a little kitten, that she wanted people not to leave the kitten behind. This is a movie story by an army man. So this is one best thing. Those who were in charge of this, committing this, or perpetrating this trauma on the people, themselves were repenting. One thing. And these papers, they never published it, but some of them were with us, with me. The other PhD thesis that done by the Australian lady, which is also available on the impact of women on grouping, that is also available on the internet. Very, very moving stories. What I'm saying, these kind of memories, be it Holocaust, be it partition, be it Rambo, or the same thing in Nagaland, or in Chhattisgarh, these stories don't come out immediately. That's what I feel. But I know an entire part, there is a huge corpus of partition literature. I myself come from a partition-displaced family. My mother and father talks about it, but they never write. They feel like I will not be able to write it. And I've been insisting so much I said, finally, I said, you tell me the story, I want to write something. They don't want to write about it. Some of the Ramboy compositions I have quoted, there are many more available in Mizo language. I wish some of you translate them for the greater community. Obviously, do it, nobody is going to do it. Please do it. So, by and by, I think, however much we wish that these trauma, experiences of trauma, transform into literary, composition by beat novel, beat poetry, beat folk song, it will come out by and by. The experience of Holocaust, most of the Holocaust movies are coming now. It did not come out in the Second World War period. Partition stories, now there are one or two partition stories, now there is a whole journal of them. And now we get Sulahau and others writing about grouping system and their impact on people. So now it is coming out. So this literature will come out, and I think I exhort the younger generation who are working, who are especially from literature and history people, please do translate those before they are lost.
And that's such a wonderful point. And I think you're right about this generational time. The healing time is really important. In my own family, my father-in-law was Korean, he was in the Korean War. He never mentioned it to my wife, but now to his granddaughter he starts to talk about it, right? And it's we're the same. Like, we want to get this before you remember, but we also don't want to push. So if I may change tack a little bit, so I'm from Australia, as you all know, and missionaries are a really huge part of what shaped colonisation in Australia. They're a huge part of how areas were named, how things were organised and done, why existing denominations are placed where they are. So I'm always fascinated when I come to Aizawl in particular, that we see statues to missionary sites for Sapa. Sapa was one of the first words I learned in Aizawl, because everywhere I walk, you do go Sapa. So I always remember him, right? Yet in Australia, for example, missionary histories are now very much problematized. It's very tricky territory. It's very challenging territory, especially for Indigenous Australians. Yet here, obviously, there's a reverence that continues to persist. And so I wanted to throw a question to Ram about our missionary number one in many senses, very Ellen. And really to think about sort of contemporary life in the region as you see it, and whether you think his legacy is evident in what we see today.
Yeah, so, it's, thank you, Duncan. First of all, it's a misnomer that Henry was a missionary. He actually never converted a single person. He was a Christian, but then he left the church. And it's mostly right-wing Hindu ideologues who call him a missionary, including the Chief Minister of Assam, who still blames him who be dead 60 years for any problems that remain in the Northeast. So I think Elvin's legacy was proper, and he was, in this region, he was responsible most for Arunachal. And of course, there's one aspect of his legacy that is enduring, which is that in Arunachal, he promoted Hindi as the lead language, not Assamese, which is what some people want. It's interesting that everyone in Arunachal speaks Hindi, and Arunachal also hasn't had an insurgency, which is kind of insignificance. But the other aspect of Elvin's legacy, which links to Joy's talk, and I'd like to say a little bit about that, is that Elvin actually was an early environmentalist. He talked, if you look at his, Elvin essentially was ethnographer of the Adivasis of Central India. His knowledge of northeastern tribals was limited. He came here late in life, he didn't know the languages, he came as a government official, so he was back at the trust. But as he spent 20 years in Central India, 22 years, working as a full-time anthropologist. And many of his works are about the role of forests and animals in Adivasi culture, And I think Joy's talk was very interesting from that point of view, because, the connection between particular species and particular clans, particular tribes. Now, I think this is something which, you know about the disappearance of the Hornbill. Now, I think this is something which the Northeast, as the non-human element in the Northeast, fauna as well as flora, but let's speak about fauna because that's what John talked about. The extraordinary diversity of bird and mammalian life in the Northeast, which still remains. And the threats to it. So in Arunachal, of course, which is one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world, it is roads and dams. Now, maybe roads are needed because India is in a conflict situation with China, and China has built roads on its side right up to the border, and maybe India wants self-defense these roads. But dams are much more problematic. I think dams historically have been shown to be large hydroelectric projects are not good for a hill region. I mean, the Uttarakhand is an area I know well. You look at, the earthquake and the devastation of dams, and also they're not cost effective. They're basically a means of awarding contracts, politicians awarding contracts to contractors with utility packs to find elections. I mean, there's no real economic justification for building large dams. I mean, there are other ways of bringing energy more safe, secure, and even cost-effective, and certainly less environmentally destructive manner. So I think part of Elvin was actually someone who talked about, responsible attitude towards nature, I mean, animals, and he was like an early prophet of what we would call sustainability. And I want to just say one thing, then I want to change that a bit, if I may, about Joy mentioned the elephant. Now, the Northeast, which is, I'm not sure Guha, but certainly Arunachal, Assam, Tripura, and Meghalaya have very large populations of wild elephants. This area, very only in the south, you have Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka, which have comparable populations. And there is, I don't know how many of you know, but 2 years ago, the Wildlife Protection Act was amended to exempt elephants, to allow elephants being traded. Elephants are an endangered species, elephants are a sacred species to many tribal communities, to Hindus, they are a sacred species. But this amendment was made to allow elephants to be traded. And another amendment in the Act was to allow a private zoo, the creation of private zoos. Now in theory, you and me can start a private zoo, except if we don't have the money. This amendment to the Wildlife Protection Act of 2 years ago, allowing private zoos and allowing elephants to be traded, was to enable the creation of the Ambani Zoo in Jamnagar. And it's an extraordinary scandal. Recently the youngest son got married. Right. Now, pre-marriage. Now, if in a engagement ceremony or in a marriage wedding ceremony, you want to lavishly spend your money, I'm okay with it. It's their money. They want to spend millions of dollars, that's fine. But the amendment of the Act, the creation of a private zoo, the illegal transportation of elephants. Now this scandal is just coming up. I wrote a short column on it last week, but there's a much longer essay coming by the investigative journalist in the journal Guha, which shows how that the entire government machinery, all the forest officers, they are promised post-retirement jobs by their money. It's an unbelievable scandal. It's a mother of all ecological scandals, and it should transport wild elephants to Jamnagar, which is an arid area in which elephants are not supposed to live. So I think this is something which will affect the Northeast, the biodiversity and the kind of intangible heritage, the more than human heritage of the Northeast, which we must be aware of. That's the power the Ambanis have. They can change the laws completely to gratify the wish of one spoiled boy who wants to hunt elephants. Because it has been said that the astrologer told him, if you get 1,000 elephants will become very successful. Now this is something that, there's an organized trade, a smuggling of elephants from Assam, from Tripura, from Arunachal. It's tougher from Karnataka and Kerala because they have somewhat better protection. So I think this is so when you talk about elephants legacy, Duncan, I think the organic link between people and the natural environment, and how the natural environment sustains them, how the non-human environment sustains them economically, culturally, spiritually, and How, of course, in modernity we use that generally, but what the new threats to are, including in the form of this Ambani's rule. That's the second thing I want to say, Duncan, if I may return to the whole issue of conflict and insurgency. Now, in this panel, I am the only Northeast expert. I mean, I have never really worked as a scholar of the Northeast, only indirectly I have worked in Heaven, who spent a few years here. I read the history of India, which spent dealing inevitably with the Nara insurgency and the Mizo insurgency, but not in terms of India preserve of the kind of Sanjoy, Hazakari, Ramachandra has done. But I want to say a little bit about Manipur. Because when we talk about the apparent peace in the Northeast and the apparent absence for the first time in many decades of any major insurgency, what is happening in Manipur is unprecedented in the history of independent India. That there is a full-fledged divide between one section of the state and another section of the state. A divide that is geographical, valley versus hills, that is ethnic, that is religious, that is ideological, and it is a civil war within the state. Now, this is never happened in any state. No, of course, there have been conflicts within the states. Joy talked about, maybe Mizoram, different type of communities. In Nagaland, it's better known with the Agamis and the rest. In Meghalaya, where Sajal and Sanjoy live between the Khasis and the Garos, so this, but a full-fledged civil war where both sides are armed, where the state armory has been looted, and thousands of arms with the connivance of the government, the central government and the state government, are now in the hands of ordinary people fighting it out. And where a vigilante group like the Welfare Vigilante group can get the evidence to take vows of a certain kind. Now this is actually much worse than insurgency. Because insurgency, when the MLF or the LSU or the Ulfa launched insurgency, you knew who you were dealing with. The state could kind of negotiate, could bring them to the table, set certain conditions. But within a state, there is this kind of civil war. And the central government is encouraging. I mean, there is nothing to stop it. To the contrary, it thinks, what in my view, this is my personal view, and I don't think I'm wrong. Why has the Prime Minister and the Home Minister allowed the situation to fester in Manipur? Why have they given control to the Chief Minister, Biren Singh, and let him do what he wants? My view is, it is because they are civically using the civil war in Manipur, allowing it to fester, become more divisive and dangerous, so that they can paint the cookies as Christians and foreigners and mobilize Hindus in the heartland for the election. That is the game. It's a very creepy and evil game. And the consequence is a entire division of the state. I don't know, Sanjoy, you know the area so well. Has there ever been a kind of situation in any state in India, not even in Punjab in the 80s, not even in Kashmir, but two sections, large sections of the state were so absolutely implacably divided. I mean,
well, the simple answer is no. I mean, you have a situation where people are displaced and they're coming here, they're going to Shillong, they're going to Guwahati. I mean, I personally know a large number of these people who've come on both sides who are friends, and I sympathize with their situation. I mean, the situation is so difficult and challenging, as many of you will know. Where I think I was telling you this, there's a scholar, a teacher in Guwahati at one of the universities, and she was watching, she and her husband were watching this television news, and suddenly, the news was in Manipur last year, and suddenly she said, that's my student. And he was in fully uniform with an AK-47 or AK-56, and he was mobilizing the village groups in his area. And he later called her and said, I've stopped studying, this is where I have to fight for my community. So this is, as we all are aware, just because we're not talking about an issue, doesn't mean it goes away. it festers, and as both as Sajal said, it could explode. And the thing is that you have what's close to a civil war in Manipur, but you have a civil war across the border in Myanmar. So you have two civil wars. Going, and in one it's a full-fledged army which is fighting against 8 or 10 insurgent. I mean, we can't even call them insurgent, ethnic armies who've been fighting Yangon for the last 60, 70 years. And on this side, there's a different flow. So, in terms of national security, and one of the country's top army officials said, I don't understand this, because this is a national security threat. And if you don't take it seriously, it could impact, it is impacting all the other states. So that's as simple as that. When you say cynical handling or manipulation of the situation, what is more important is a state's safety and security, the security of its people. All this feeds into each other, everything feeds.
I think to pick up to your earlier point on ways too, is that USPA may be shelled, right? But that doesn't mean a reduction in troop numbers. In fact, we've seen an increase in one parts of the region. And it also doesn't really change the kind of long-term culture of militarization and impunity, right? So the lifting of an act is sort of not lifting, so not repeal, but I'm going to say rescinding. But the other side, is celebrated, look at this progress towards peace that the previous government could never achieve. But yet, the reality on the ground is not very different. Right? And in fact, it's worse because of the escalation in troop numbers, etc., etc. So maybe on that last point, maybe Joy, if I can cross back to you. It's not exactly a fair question, but we do see. You alluded in your talk, and you have certainly done some other work about at least the imagination of an greater territorial community, right? That is outside contemporary borders and boundaries. And it feels as if at the present moment, particularly in this city, that imagination is being called upon more and more for help, for relief, etc. So I wonder how you feel about the durability of that idea and how it maintains through kind of crisis of a sort of greater Zor or greater community.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. I don't know how to answer it. So I was talking to the driver of my taxi that was coming up from Nagpur the other day, and of course talking with other people as well. It's a complicated issue. That's why I don't know how to articulate it very well. But I think we have to recognize that there are two sort of strands with regard to the idea of a greater Mizoram or a greater, larger macro identity amongst the so-called Mizo groups. And one is, of course, there is, especially from non-governmental organizations, there is a great push towards this larger macro identity. And everybody seems to be talking about this official sort of narrative. But if you talk to people at an individual level, you realize that there is also a lot of opposition to it as well. And many people are extremely skeptical about the implications of this larger, broader narrative. So I think that it is a situation that is at some point going to implode, because like in many places, a long time ago, there was this Albanian Kosovo crisis, and I happened to be, go there for some relief work. And one of the things that was very problematic over there also was that when the Kosovars were moving into Albania, they found that the Kosovar Albanians were much more qualified than the Albanians, because Albania, as you know, was under the Ceausescu's, and it was very, Albania was under the, so yeah, and so it was lacked development, and they found that the people coming over from Albania were much more developed. And so even though they welcomed them, there was a recognition that they were Albanians together, but yet there was a growing resentment because a lot of the refugees at that point in time that was coming to the Albanian, to the Kosovo refugees as well. So I think, there is an implied understanding amongst a lot of people in Mizoram that people who are coming from Manipur are much more educationally qualified in many ways. And so therefore in future, I don't know how far it lasts, but there could be possible resentment at this, in this growing crisis that is happening. So that's one. The second thing, it's not directly related to the question that you're talking about, but the official narrative has often said that we people were always united from time immemorial, and it is the British that has divided us. It's the British that has brought these boundaries and we have divided, so we should be united now. And I think one has to, if one wants to construct a larger unity, that's fine, but one should not use a false historical narrative to construct it. I think that is very, very important. Because if we think about our histories, we were always fighting against each other. This idea of a national identity never existed in time immemorial. So we have to recognize that. I think it's very, very important to recognize that. And secondly, I think I just want to end with a question to say that is it colonialism in fact that created this idea of being a larger ethnic community? It's actually colonialism that created this idea of a greater unity rather than colonialism having divided us. So I think that is also something that we need to think about and consider. Because, for instance, the very idea that we all belong to the same language group, this was brought in by Grierson and others who placed all of us within one language group, and things like that. So there are many ways in which you can sort of deconstruct this official narrative as well. And if one wants to build a greater unity, I think there should be other narratives that operate in favor of that rather than building upon false historical narratives.
Can I just add to that? Yeah. I would urge those of you who are studying history and those who are not studying history to also read the work of David Siembe on the Crown Colony. Because at the time of independence, some British officials, including Governor of Assam, Robert Reed, actually played with the idea, or not just played with it, but developed the idea and put it into official records that there should be a Crown Colony as a buffer zone of all the tribal states, which would retain separate legal status from the rest of India, which would become independent. And this would be starting from the Arunachal Hills, through the Naka Hills, Mizoram, Chittagong Hill Tracts, into the Chin area and parts of Nagaland. All that area would be under the British on the White Hawk. And luckily, of course, that didn't come to pass. So it's important what you've just spoken about, of the colonial construct, that these things have a role in a very large measure in both in the public imagination and in official records. That's one. The second thing is, I just want to clarify a point, because we've been talking a little bit about civil war and so on. The civil war, definition of civil war is really when the security forces, the military forces, the police forces of a country, for instance, the Balkans, what you had, was essentially the forces being divided on the basis of religion, ethnicity, and their own sense of nationality, and essentially fighting each other. Now, in Manipur, that hasn't happened yet. There is division. The issue has come close to conflagration at times, but it hasn't happened yet, and let's hope it doesn't. So we need to just keep that clarification in mind.
I wonder then, we have 15 minutes, right? Is that correct?
So can you do one to one if you want?
Oh, no, it's okay, it's okay. We are old, now we'll fall asleep if we go out. I just wondered if we were allowed to open up to questions from the audience, right? Because they've been very patient, they've listened to a lot, and I think with the time left, I think that would be a good use of the time. Because we've read many things, many difficult things, many interesting things, and I think that it would be good to give a chance to the audience to ask some questions. So, is there so are you able to do microphone duties, or is it?
There are psychologists amongst us. They enlighten us from the psychological point of view, the period from where a person recovers and could tell his or her story. From psychologists, we have psychologists amongst us. Can you please tell us the psychological aspect of dealing with young boy? Can you tell me? Or the students?
And also, if there's any other questions, if you could just raise your hand, and I'll try and sort of take a mental note of where people are. Okay. Question? They didn't want to answer that question, which I can have. Any questions? Please be brave. We are all very nice people. Anything, it doesn't have to be about what we've discussed. You can ask us anything you like. About whether there are enough trees in Aizawl, I can answer that now, no. But I'm surprised at the ones that are here growing out of the concrete and things, but yeah.
No questions?
No questions? Nothing. We've answered all problems. Okay, great.
Go ahead.
Hello. Hello, I'm Joshua. I'm a dance choreographer and doing my own cultural arts research. And so thank you for wondering. We need to learn from ecological ways of how people study animal movement. How can we do that with languages with the people? But also there's this growing sense of building identities within Mizos. As you said, there's this greater Mizo identity. And also across these states, like identity politics is also really coming up. We see here in universities as well, everyone's writing on identity politics. Is there a danger to not danger, sorry. Is there a possibility of the people accepting these cross-border, beyond-border identifications that goes beyond these Mizo identities? And also, my other question is there's all these histories that we have, that maybe my grandfather knows, or maybe my mom might know, but our generation doesn't get to hear so much. What's the role of, what's the importance of officiating these things in the curriculum, not just in the university level, but how can we bring these conversations, I don't know, with governments or with the education department, how can we bring these histories through the curriculum? Is there a push for that, or is there a need, or how do we address this going into the future so that there's not so much forgetting?
Yeah, so very good questions. Thank you for that, Joshua. And I'll answer the second one first, which is quite simple in a way, which is that by writing, I suppose, so I think, as somebody had already mentioned, it's very important to write. But I must also say that, and this is sort of not known to the non-Mizo audience, which is that in Mizoram, there are two things, if I may say so. One is everybody makes a music video, and the second thing is, so many people write, there's so much of Mizo work in Mizo, which is very different from other northeastern states. There's so much of material. Okay? Now the only problem with that kind of writing is that it doesn't follow the steps that Professor Guha spoke about yesterday, which is it suffers from all those points that we had mentioned, you know. So I think it's very, very important to continue to write, of course, but also to develop the craft of history writing in a way in which it makes sense of, obviously, the interpretation, the logical reasoning, the fact that it has to be bereft of chauvinism and all the other points that Professor Guha had mentioned. So I think this is something that we need to do. Okay? Now the other, I mean, we can go on and on about all the kind of problems that we as Mizos face, like for instance in education, and this huge divide between writing and our education all being in English, but our inability to articulate in English, and you know, articulation, oral articulation is done in Mizo, but we can't. So all those problems are there, which we have to circumvent and try and circumvent. But we have to get proper writing, you know. I think that's very, very important. And of course, for the time being, even if you can't write, I think maybe it's good to start out with recording what your grandparents have to say, recording what you know, older people you think who are important will be able to help you saying it. Okay, so that's one thing. Now the other thing is, yes, even me, whenever I write about the Northeast, it always boils down to identity, whether it is a narrow Mizo identity or a greater Mizo identity. And to a certain extent, even in entangled lives, even though we're thinking about entanglements, it always comes down to identity again, how people identify themselves with love. So in a certain sense, it's very difficult to move away from the idea of identity, but I think what is important is to recognize that there are what is known in history as historical contingencies. There is not just one straight narrative that is creating identity. There are so many historical contingencies. Like, if you read, sorry, just when I do this, I'm getting names. What is the name of this Mizo Chansin? Liang. Yeah, if you look at Liang work, for instance, one of the first Mizo pastors, historians who wrote about the Mizo history, it's like, you know, like Mizos developed from one straight line, you know, like in one narrative, you know, in the sense. But you have to recognize that identity is the result of various kinds of historical contingencies, and what we've been trying to do here is to try and see the various sort of contingencies that have been involved in the creation of that identity. So I think I don't know whether that has answered your question, Joshua, but I think we have to kind of, you know, develop that much more, and it has to be interdisciplinary for one, you know, and things like that. I think.
I just want to make a comment on that last point in answer to your question too, is that I think that we assume identity politics is everywhere in the Northeast because that's all we go looking for, right? We assume that's everyone's starting point, especially with young people. I've done lots of work with young people from the Northeast here and in other parts of India living together. And there's all kinds of things that like both transcend divisions, right? Moments of solidarity, helping each other. Finding an Arunachali who can speak Hindi to help you deal with the vegetable wallet, all these kind of strange situational solidarity. But one of the reasons I'm very interested in subculture in the region is that might be people's dominant identity. Their sort of ethnic or community identity isn't constant, it doesn't kick in all the time everywhere, which is why religion is really important, which is why sort of subculture and interests and arts and other things are really interesting. One of the disciplines that seems to bypass this region is cultural studies, you know, which really reshaped the academy in the West during the 1980s and 90s. But we seem to only be able to talk about culture here as ethnic culture. We don't seem to be able to talk about culture in any other ways. You know? And I think it's very important that it's dominant, it's powerful, it's important, it's constantly talked about. But we also only look for it. We don't look for its breakdowns, its alternatives, its disjunctures. And there's just this whole kind of world of sort of research waiting there for people to. Rama, did you want to comment on this? I can see you in my peripheral vision. I didn't know you were there. This is the difficulty of speaking and moderating. But it's a very fantastic question, and I think that your answer to it is really important. It's hard to escape, but it doesn't have to be everything. And I think that's crucial. Any other questions? Joshua's question was very brave. Yes, there's another question there. Are you able to get the microphone?
I'm doing a research on, my research had to do with media and nationalism. I'm a scholar from Mizoram University. And as part of my research, I went through the media coverage of the Ramachandra, the famine, and also the bombing and the incidents that took place at that time. And what I found was that the coverage was very one-sided, and everything that was spoken about here was that the people here are terrorists and nothing about the background struggle. But somehow it feels like that happened many years ago, but till today there is marginalization of the media, especially in the Northeast. So I just wanted your thoughts about this, maybe from Professor Sajal and Mr. Sanjoy.
That's an excellent question. Who would like to go first?
Yeah. First thing is, you said there is a one-sided, but I feel there has been a two-sided, in the sense there has been a local media as well. How did Mizo newspapers, Mizo media saw? Because in the 1960s, I also worked on that area. There were a lot of newspapers, Mizo language. I don't know how they represented. That the representation from the rest of India, I mean, the way they have done it is not that to be in Nagaland, wherever there was rebellion against the Indian state, the media coverage was similar. But I would be interested in what the local media has said. So if you have covered that, that will be very interesting, and see the contrast between them. Number one. Number two, I have this issue about nationalism. Now, nationalism, I just have written a book called Nation and Its Operations. It's just published, not it out in India, but I translated. I have talked about that, nation is not an indigenous idea. It originated in Europe, but the way it originated is very interesting. And that is why I think universities are such an important science. Like in India, I could not refer to in my talk, I mentioned in the February 2016 episode in JNU, where nationalism was debated, and because of which those activities were persecuted. But nation as a discourse had originated in European universities only. And nation was a discourse of always of othering. Like one group of people, they say they belong to other nation. In the university, there are a number of groups of people, this group of people from another nation. That is how nation originated. So nation has always from the beginning is a discourse of othering. And if you see the evolution of it, now we say we are nation, we have kind of internalized and identified as a self-goal or as a self-identification. It is not supposed to mean that. The way the discourse of nationalism came to India and the way we propagated it has to be debated. I found that there is well-known Professor Guha has written forward, an immensely important forward to Tagore's idea of nationalism. He was vehemently against it. He talked about it in the heart of nation in Japan and America. But why did he oppose it? That is very important, I would say. Similarly, I found the proponent of nationalism in India, right from Gandhi to Nehru, all of them sometime or the other oppose the idea of nationalism. So we don't go by, I told my students before retirement, when was taking place, what is your identity? He said, we Indians are a nation. I said, but have you always been a nation? Why do you call yourself a nation? Before the British, were you a nation? Was Middle India a nation? How did this identification of nationhood come about? When did they accept it? And what was the process through which we accepted our identification as a nation? So unless we understand all these, the discussion of nationalism will be just appropriating the idea of nationalism from Europe. Otherwise, so the way we appropriate it and the way we did not accept some aspect of nationalism is very important. So what I'm saying, this othering of aspect of nationalism is very important. That must be important. There are those media which has opposed any dissenting voice as terrorism, extremism, all these. They are othering them because they feel they are, by othering them, they are becoming the ambassador of Indian nation state or Indian nationalism. Anybody who, unless you confirm, you are anti-national or a terrorist or a thing. So in media also this has to be applied, I think. This media, how it behaves. So media is not, people are not coming from heaven and angels. They are, they are one of us who sometimes they are apostles of nationalism, sometimes they are not. When I talk about, I read two poems, Mizo poem here, one of them in 1940s talked about Gandhi and Nehru and we are now free, we are Indians. But at the same time, there were also quoted that, are we Indians? And how do we become Indians? So this dilemma, this dichotomy has to be understood in that context, and that perhaps continues. We already talked the earlier question that Duncan has put out, that why there is so much of silence suddenly with the coming of the present regime. That is also something to do with that. How nationalism behaves. So that theory, if we apply, I think that will be benefit much.
I'm trying to be very brief, but I have a question. What's the time frame for your study? What's the time frame? In what time frame have you looked at these issues?
There were a couple of years that I looked at, 1959, 1966, the year of the famine, and then the year of the bombing.
So basically those 2 years, nothing in between or afterwards. Well, I think to get a good perspective of that, you'll have to look at a larger time frame, no? And I'm not saying that the media covers itself with glory. I speak as a journalist and a writer. Covers itself in glory in these terrible times. But we have to look at what the media is dominated by. Are you looking at the Assam Tribune? You're looking at the Assam Tribune? Yes. Which papers in Mizo are you looking at? Are you looking at local papers also?
So I'm looking at I was focusing on the national papers just to get the perspective.
Must tell you one thing, there's nothing called national media. They're only metro media. Okay? Everything is driven by business in the city. So you will look at the Statesman, which was pretty anti Northeast, I think. But I would simply say two things. One is try and look at, listen to what All India Radio said. They used to have things called radio newsreels and sometimes discussions. It would be interesting to get that perspective from those days. And the other thing is, the media at that time and even now was dominated in a different way by government. There was independent media was really restricted to the metro media, like the Times of India, but the Indian Express and a couple of others. So would only suggest also that you look at some of the PhD work that has emerged from people. I know that the people, I always used to get these calls from universities and colleges from students saying that I'm working on a piece on mainstream media prejudice against the Northeast. Can I come and see you? So there are lots of things which have been written, and I would urge you to look at some of that because you might find something useful in that.
Thank you very much. So I also think on that point too is that someone in our children, right, your children, studying the violence of 2023, 2024 in this region, are they going to be looking for traditional media sources to tell that story? And if they do, they're going to be terrible, right? The archiving of this conflict is not happening in traditional media, it's happening in other kinds of media, which is the point I was sort of trying to make yesterday, right? That's where we have to look in the future. So the continuity of good sources is very contingent, I think, and I'm often interrupted. Now, one of the most difficult things when you're a moderator is that you often find yourself in a situation where you're between people and lunch, and I think I don't really want to be in that situation any longer. I have panelists who've worked very hard answering some very tricky questions. We've had excellent questions from the audience. I'm looking for who can give me permission to end. Who's boss? So we can. Can I call it? Yeah, call it. Okay. Thank you. Can we please applause for I haven't accidentally promised to feed people, but I think I'll let someone else do that logistics announcement if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, lunch for our special invitees will be hosted by principal and the registered participants can have their lunch outside.